Well, thank you everyone for joining us with our webinar here today with Veeam. My name is Kyle Thompson, account manager over at Pine Cove. We have Holly Womack, who's our marketing manager. JD Parady, correct? Parady. I'm so sorry.
It's all right, Kyle.
And then Bronson Aber here with Veeam. Thank you guys for jumping on with us to go over Veeam. So I'm going to jump in first and just kind of talk about Pine Cove. So most of you guys already know us, but for those who don't, we kind of have this new graphic here that kind of shows the different components that we operate in your environment. So whether it's a support service, an infrastructure that you need to change out, physical security, student wellness, communication, or cybersecurity, we really can jump in and help in any of these aspects. What we love about Veeam is Veeam kind of touches a few of these aspects, right? So it helps us both with our support services, some cybersecurity, and also some infrastructure. So we love working with these guys, and I think you're going to love what they have to share today. So let's see here. So who's Pine Cove? Again, most of you guys know who we are, but we have been growing quite a bit. So we have some new employees now in Colorado, another new employee in Utah, some additional employees in Montana. We are growing rapidly, and as you can see, our footprint's expanding to about 14 different states. So no matter where you're at, we can help you both on-site, remote. We do a great job with remote, as you can tell, and would love to talk to you a little bit more about any problems you have. Holly did some great graphics down here. I want to just highlight this too. We keep getting recognized in our space, whether it's from CRN or from Verkada or from Sophos or whomever. We do a great job from the channel side, and we keep winning awards for doing a great job with our customers. So I just want to show that and highlight that. So again, today we're talking about Veeam and really the importance of backup and recovery. In any environment, data is critical. It's the component that keeps business alive. It's the component that makes sure that education can function, right? With no data, it's really hard to be effective in what we do. Now, the thing we're talking about today is, what do you do when you lose that data, right? Or how do we avoid losing that data? Maybe the better way to say that. So we want to talk about backup and recovery and what we've done with Veeam. Veeam is an industry leader in that backup and recovery solution. And so we're excited to talk about them. So what is backup and recovery? Obviously, when you have a subset of data that's stored, whether locally or in the cloud or wherever that might be, the purpose of backup recovery is to create a replication. So we have an additional copy of that data so that if you go down, whether it's data corruption, some sort of failure, maybe it's a cybersecurity attack that you've had, somebody's tried to take control of your data, and then, what do we do with that? Do we have a backup? Do we have a clean copy that we can restore to? What does that look like? And that's really what backup and recovery entails. Bronson, do you want to add anything to that? What is backup and recovery? Any other key points you'd like to add in there?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, on kind of the technical side of this, right, is there's this notion of 3-2-1, right? 3 copies of your data, 2 different medias, at least 1 off-site, and that's something that Veeam kind of pioneered years ago. But we've now kind of taken that to new heights. So now we have 3-2-1-1-0, same base model, right? So we got 3 copies, 2 different mediums, at least 1 off-site. But now we're recommending at least having 1 of those copies be immutable at a minimum, and then obviously having 0 errors inside of those backups. So if and when, it's probably a matter of when, not if, you get hit, you have that data in a safe place, off-site perhaps, and then being tested early and often so that you know that there's no errors inside of it.
Yeah, nothing could be worse than getting attacked by some sort of cybersecurity criminal, and you go to check your backup and it's corrupted, or you're missing data, or the backup occurred 2 months ago, so you can recover most of it, but the last 2 months you've now lost. I mean, nothing could be worse than that. So great model there, 3-2-1-0. So let's talk about where do you lose your data? Like where are the biggest failure points in your network? Holly did this great graphic, and as you can see, there's some key areas here, but really the biggest one, like we talked about real briefly here, is cybersecurity attacks. Bronson, I think you said it very aptly. It's not a matter of if, but when. Everyone's getting hit these days, and there seems to be no discretion from any criminals out there on who they can attack. So as you can tell, number one, cybersecurity, that is the biggest area of losing data, and why backup and recovery is so important. the other couple ones are really just human errors, right? Users can make mistakes. We put something in a recycle bin, or we delete something, or whatever it might be. It's just a user error, right? The other problem we have here is really stuff breaks, right? Nothing is stagnant in any environment. So whether it's hard drive failure, some kind of internet outage, maybe your backup that you have stored offsite or in the cloud, isn't backing up because you have an outage of some kind. Various things can come through that way, but outages do occur, right? It could be an OS outage, doesn't have to be hardware, it could be software, right? Various different things there. So with that said, the most impactful attacks, like we said, are cybersecurity. That's what we're going to probably hit on the most here today. But keep in mind that data can be lost in any variety of ways. JD, do you want to add anything to that?
I would like to add one more thing, and this is something that relates to what you were just talking about. When Bronson started talking about the 32110 methodology, one of the things that we're finding in our space right now is that customers are starting to explore, or have already explored, becoming cyber insured.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're finding is the underwriters that are carrying these policies are requiring, through a list of questions, that folks actually comply with that 32110 methodology. And if they're not willing, or they're not in compliance with those requirements, they're not even insurable.
Right.
Because the risk associated with the carrying of that policy is so great, if they don't have the ability to restore from a reliable backup target, that the underwriters won't even look at them. And so if folks are willing to look at that 3211 methodology and protect themselves in layers, as Bronson likes to put it, we're finding that their insurance premiums are much, much lower than if they just kind of go in with standard practice that they've had for many years. So we would just suggest that folks really seriously look at layering their immutability, which basically means you've got a copy that is unchangeable, or air gapping a solution, off site somewhere, so that the ransomware or the malicious attackers can't get to that data.
Yeah. Well, I love what you highlighted there, like the return on investment, right? You're investing in something and getting an immediate return right there from, an insurance
premiums.
policy.
Right.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. The thing I also think about too, when I'm thinking about ROI, and that's where my mind went as you were talking about some of that stuff, is I met with a customer about a year ago, and they were still doing, and you might laugh when I tell you this, it's an old style of backup where they had different drives that they'd pop in, they'd back up, and at the end of the day, they'd take that drive home and they'd put a different one in. And so there was always an offsite copy, right? And that administrator had been doing that for years. I mean, just years. And the man hours, obviously there's some potential user error problems that could break right there. Like we talked about, either it's some sort of outage or a user makes a mistake, even the administrator makes a mistake. But I just thought about the ROI. Like, man, you're putting so much time every day remembering to have to go do that, pull it out, plug it in, wait for it to back up, wait for it to connect. So much time. And this, Veeam can provide an immediate ROI, both from that cybersecurity aspect and also just from the time aspect, right?
Well, in that, in an act of not desperation, but in an effort to try and air gap their solution, we all kind of have swept under the rug the situation a few years ago where an entire case of tapes went missing from a large university.
Yep.
Right? And the risk associated with that is just as great as being hit by ransomware and having your data basically leaked to the public that way. It's identical.
Yeah.
So
great point there. Thank you. Bronson, did you want to share something there too?
Yeah, so just wanted to call out one other thing that we've seen quite a bit lately. And I think there's, when we talk about ransomware, or even just disasters in general, right? Oftentimes we think of earthquake, fire, flood, the general disasters. But really, if you kind of take a step back and peel back the layers of the onion, right? If you think about it, ransomware in itself is a disaster, right? Because now obviously your data is going to be locked down, but we've even seen instances where the FBI comes in. It's been reported, as it should be, and they come in and they lock down a data center, right? And now the data center is a crime scene, so now you can't actually return to business, right? They still have to do their forensic investigation. So, like with Veeam, for example, we can still move that data off site, give you the ability to fail over, fail back. So yeah, I think it's just kind of this holistic approach to protecting yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you. All right, so so why is having this data recovery method so important? So the risk of not being able to restore that important information, right? We talked about it, whether there could be a gap or maybe the data is corrupted or whatever that might be. Restoring everything is pertinent, right? People want that near 100% uptime if possible, or near 100% restore point if possible. And then decreasing our time of either business closures or data recovery. Holly found this great statistic here that 66% of SMBs close after 6 months, most of the time due to data loss, right? If they have some kind of data loss, they are likely to close very quickly, just because of not having that data. It's a big problem, especially when you're a new company. And then lastly, just reducing the cost. My mind always goes here. What's our ROI? What's our potential replacement cost? And I want to kind of share an example that's not necessarily specific to software, but I think highlights kind of the point. My brother-in-law actually had a trailer stolen, like a physical security trailer stolen, and immediately right after he said, "Man, I would pay everything up to like $1 less than the cost of that trailer to get it back right this second." Right? So the trailer cost 10 grand, he paid $9,999 because it'd be less. And sometimes we don't think about the potential damaging effect and the cost of losing that data. I mean, JD, you mentioned that whether that data is leaked to the public, it's leaked online, that data is very pertinent, whether it goes to the dark web. I mean, there's so many different places it can go. And Holly, again, found this great statistic here that the average cost is $203 per record of data that can be lost, and whether that's a direct cost to the operations, whether it's a direct cost to your hardware to replace that data, whatever it might be. I mean, that's the average cost is an actual number that they've formulated, and that's actually Holly, was it $50 more than the industry average?
For education, it's $45 more. So it's about $247 for an educational record.
That's crazy. So, just the actual cost of losing data is huge.
Well, and, Kyle, one of the things that relates to what we're talking about in this cost of operation is the fact that you have two risks when you are hit by cyber malicious attackers. The first is obviously that they encrypt the entire data and you're unable to continue operations. And so not having a secure, unchangeable copy or the ability to easily recover in that situation while you deal with the forensics can cost the organization a bunch of money, right? That's one part. And then the other one you brought up, and that is if stuff does get leaked out into the public, you decide not to pay the ransom and it goes out into the public. Now, all of a sudden you have another set of risk mitigation steps that have to go into place. And that is, do I need to provide identity protection? Do I need to provide all these things for my end users that their data is now out in the wild? And that's where these insurance providers are coming in and they're saying, we cover both. If you have to pay a ransom, and if after the fact it does get released and you've got some exposure from a data perspective. So having this secure backup solves one of those, and that is you can be back up and running, right? But you still got to be concerned about that other piece, and that's where either self-insuring or providing, making sure you've got an underwriter that's willing to help cover those costs if your data is released into the public are critical pieces to really providing yourselves a back end that allows you to sleep at night knowing I'm covered either way.
Yeah. What's interesting about what you're talking about too is that the amount of data leaks that are occurring are massive, and I don't think we always know. One thing that I love about working in Montana is Montana has a law that specifically says that any data that is lost that applies to a Montana, that company has to record it by law in that state. And I don't remember seeing the 2022 statistics, but in 2021, when we did an evaluation, we went back and assumed that, the number of data leaks that occurred and the number of Montanans affected, it can be somewhat messy with the data that they put out. But we assumed that for every data leak, that it was probably the same Montana at least twice, right? So maybe each time we see data lost, it was two different companies losing one Montanan's data. And it was nearly 50% of the population of Montana had lost data in some form or function when we kind of analyzed the data that way. Now you could say maybe there was one Montana that got leaked 20 times and then one guy only got leaked once. It's a little hard sometimes to sift through the data, but it was just shocking to see the statistics that nearly the population of Montana, there was double the amount of data leaks that applied to one specific person. I mean, just massive amounts of data are being lost all the time. And sometimes we don't hear about it till, 6, 12 months after. And then, like you said, JD, that those companies are having to provide that identity protection, or supposed to be providing that. And I think that's just something that we're not always cognizant of. And that can also apply in education, right? If you're losing student data, personally identifiable data. I know here in Utah, if you have any personally identifiable data that's lost, that's a crime in Utah, so you need to protect that data and always be cognizant of what's happening with your data, right?
And I know for like the Montana report for the 2022, which evaluates 2021 data, it's just getting worse. The number of data leaks. And that's not just for education, but that's for a variety of industries. I mean, even private education, charter schools, private religious schools. I mean, small businesses, large businesses. We're seeing this trend over and over again that it's only getting worse because those cyber attacks are able to learn with the technology.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, with that, I think we're going to jump in and go ahead and show you a little bit about Veeam's backup and recovery solution. Is that correct?
We can, yes.
Let's do that.
So what you're looking at now is the console for Veeam backup and replication. Really, this is kind of the control plane where you're going to run all of your backup operations and even run the restore functions as well. So when we look at kind of adding in machines to a policy, right, to be protected, from a Veeam perspective, you're going to notice a trend through this whole thing. It is very simple, very straightforward, and we have a lot of different features that we can enable through this. So once you've added your machines in, I've got 3 different machines here, different virtual machines that I've added in. We can protect these just statically. We could do it by data store, by folder, even by VMware tags or Hyper-V tags for that matter. So a lot of different ways that we can enable automating these protection policies to eliminate some of the soft costs associated to managing standard backup operations. Now, you get to decide here from a retention perspective, first and foremost, I guess, where the data lands, and then how much data you want to keep around. Could be 30 days, 90 days. Some people even have the requirement from a compliance perspective to keep these backups around for years. All right, so if you need to keep them around for 7 years, you could absolutely do that. Again, just check a box, indicate how many years you want to have from a granularity perspective. One thing that's really cool with Veeam too is that there's no agents that have to be installed at all, unless of course there's physical workloads in the mix. And we can do a lot of different things inside of those backups as far as enabling granular level restores for Active Directory or SQL or Exchange, things like that. So and really there you just check a box again. And then from a schedule perspective, make this as simple as you want or as granular as it needs to be. We can protect it every hour, every 15 minutes. Even every 4 hours, if depending on the workload and criticality. Now, I talked a little bit about the repository piece, and Veeam is very flexible in nature, right? We're agnostic from start to finish, right? Can target just about anything, whether it be direct attached storage, network attached, dedupe appliances, even object storage from the cloud. But oftentimes, managing these respective repositories adds a layer of complexity, right? So what Veeam has done is we've created what we call a scale out backup repository. The cool thing about this, right, is that what it does is that it effectively gives us a single addressable target, right? So we can take our backup policies, configure them to run as often as we need, and target this scale out repository that consists of really 3 different layers, right? So on-prem, we're going to have our performance tier. This could be multiple storage targets, dissimilar hardware on the back end. We group it together, right? So now it becomes a single capacity pool. And again, you can have many, we'll call them extents, but really it's just targets, repositories locally. Have all these grouped together. And again, we act as that abstraction layer on top, handle load balancing, so on and so forth. But then if you do want to tier this off to the cloud, kind of going back to that 3-2-1 rule, this is a way that we kind of help automate that entire process, reducing management overhead and soft costs associated with it. So really here, you just check a box and indicate, yeah, I do want to tier this offsite. I want my latest backup to be air gapped logically. So we could do that. We copy it offsite, and then we can even manage the storage lifecycle for you, right? So you set a retention policy at the job level. I need to keep 90 days, entirely. But I don't want all of that to sit here locally. We could automate that tiering operation, keep your most recent month or your most recent 2 weeks local, but still complying with your retention requirements, pushing it offsite. And then to JD's point, right? If you are sending data offsite to prevent the Robinhood attacks where people are extracting data and then potentially going to leak it, we always recommend that you add another layer of encryption there. Right, and then, let me turn that off. So then the third piece, right, for the people out there that need to store 7 years, 8 years, keep it forever. This is a really nice way to bring in yet a third layer of storage, archive storage. This could be Glacier Deep, and this really kind of competes with the economics of tape, traditional tape backups. But what's nice is you could, in theory, have immutable copies in the performance tier on-prem, right? So those files can't be deleted, encrypted, or changed. We could then get an immutable copy up in the cloud, object storage, and then if we go to archive tier, a third copy that would be immutable. So I think really, from my perspective, I like to look at this from a layered approach. The more layers you can add into here, the better off you're going to be from a security posture perspective. Okay, so I think backup, right, is only obviously going to be it's table stakes here, right? When it comes to getting the data back, this is really where you unlock the power of Veeam. And you can see here that I've got a couple different machines here, but again, no agents have to be installed with Veeam whatsoever. You point us to the workload, assuming it's virtual, and then you get all of these recovery items at your disposal. And really from what we're seeing from our customer interactions we're having today, not all data is created equal, right? So therefore, these recovery operations are going to need to be able to follow suit. And really what you need is a Swiss Army knife of tools, right? Because these recoveries are going to differ depending on, the catastrophic event. If it was just a single server, that's great, right? If it's an application that consists of multiple VMs, right, that have interdependencies upon each other, that's going to be different, right? Whereas if it's an entire site destroying event, data center's gone, we need that flexibility to be able to spin this up, at an offsite location, perhaps even fail back if it was a temporary outage. So from a recovery perspective, I'm not going to go through all of them, but you can see here we could do instant restores from right back into your virtual infrastructure, disk level restores. We can roll back just change blocks. If ransomware does breach the perimeter, we can just roll that straight back. We could restore guest files, right? So the files and folders inside of these guest VMs, whether it's Windows or Linux, this is probably going to be 90% of the restore operations that we see on a daily basis. So pulling out files and folders is certainly possible. And then if you need to, if there's an application that's database driven, like in this case, an Active Directory server, right, a domain controller, you need to be able to get individual items back. Could be, and let me show you this here really quick. Could be just an individual file or folder, or excuse me, user, a GPO, a static zone for printers. You have a couple different options. So here you just choose your recovery point. For auditing purposes, you can give it a reason, and then we click browse. What's really cool here, right, is that now we're actually cracking into what we call a Veeam Explorer. And this is really going to peel back the layers of this backup. And now we're actually mounting just the database, right? We don't need that entire server quite yet. We're going to do just an individual, component here out of Active Directory. Now these Explorers are built in to Veeam. They're not an a la carte thing. It's proprietary. It's built into the platform, and it enables you to do a lot of granular type restores. So as soon as this loads here, we're going to be able to browse through Active Directory. And let me show you this. So I'm looking at my users, right? If I wanted to look at the employees inside of here, this is great. I can do, restores of the entire user if they're no longer there, right? Export them. So you have a couple different options there. But the thing I like to show the most is we can actually compare what's in this backup to what's in production today. Again, kind of simplifying and removing a lot of that management overhead when it comes to performing these restores. So you can see here, Dana, for example, what's in the backup is different than what's in production, right? So now I can just say, hey, let me just compare these attributes. So we can do the entire user, right? The entire object, or even attributes of that object. So here, somebody changed their delivery office name. In production, it's now test, but in the backup value was somewhere else, right? So Very powerful. We bubble that up. No need to go, search through the needle, search for that needle in a haystack. But to give you some additional context, all the unchanged attributes that we can also see here, employee number, right, their cell phone number, the location. You can see any one of these, if they have changed, they would be bolded, and then you could literally just click restore and flip it right back on the Active Directory side. All right, let's change gears a little bit and talk about maybe a full VM restore, right? And this could be, again, back to your on-prem virtual infrastructure, or we can even go direct restore into the public cloud. So again, lots of flexibility, kind of speaking to that Swiss Army knife of recovery tools. When we want to put an entire machine back into, in this case, vSphere, I've got just a single domain controller. I could add in more machines if there was application dependency, but in this case, it's just a single standalone domain controller. Now, we do have some flexibility. We can go back to the source, or we can restore to a different location. So in this case, I'm going to restore to a similar VMware environment, but I'm going to rename, add a suffix to this domain controller for Pine Cove, right? And now when we put this back, what's nice is before we go and instantiate this machine and put it back into production, we can actually scan the contents of the backup to make sure that there is no zero-day attack sitting inside, because that's something we see a lot of nowadays, where ransomware, instead of getting in and trying to just as fast as humanly possible encrypt all of the data, now what they're doing is they're sitting quiet, right? They sit stagnant, not very compute intensive, so you don't really know that it's there. And the last thing you want to do on a recovery operation is inject this malicious attack right back into the infrastructure, right? Basically restarting your continuity strategy. So we can scan the contents, injecting your AV definitions, and we basically anything that uses command line interface, which is like 99% of AV solutions out there today, we can use those antivirus definitions and inject them as part of this restore process. Now, again, I can give it a reason for auditing purposes, but I'm going to spin this domain controller up. Our production domain controller is still online, so I'm just not going to connect this to the network. Now, what's going to happen on the back end is Veeam is now effectively presenting the Veeam repository as a data store to the host. So as far as, in this case, VMware, as far as they know, a new data store just showed up that happened to have a VM inside of it. And now this process, regardless of VM size, is a very similar flow. It's usually going to take about a minute, right? We got to first obviously create the data store. We then publish the backup files, create a VM, take a snapshot, all the normal operations of just creating a new virtual machine. And then once it's registered inside VMware, we'll actually get a prompt here at the bottom to open the console. So I can pop the console directly to this VM that I just restored right from the Veeam interface. No need to even go over to VMware. So the other thing you'll notice after we register this VM and power it on, it's going to say right here, waiting for user to start migration, right? So if I wanted to, I could just pop this console and we can actually just see a splash screen, right? We'll be able to see the splash screen, and then eventually we'll see a login prompt. It's a very, very fast process. And again, this could be a 20 terabyte file server for all the, it doesn't matter to us. It's all respectively the same on the back end. But let me show you one more thing. So you notice now in the top left, instant recovery is running. If this was a true production failover, right, I could migrate this to production and we would facilitate that vMotion, move it off of the backup target into the primary array. Again, I could open the console directly from here. I've already done that, however, right? So we can see this machine's about to get us to a login screen here. And then lastly, right, if it was just a test, we can stop publishing and effectively remove this VM from inventory. So yeah, you can see this machine is just about to spin up here. So we're at a login prompt. Obviously, I could then go log into that machine. But being that this was just a test, I'm actually going to go ahead and stop publishing. And what you'll see is really the inverse of that same operation. We're now going to remove the machine from inventory and clean it up to effectively leave it exactly how we found it. So with that, I mean, that's really kind of Veeam in a nutshell. Lots of flexibility, lots of power, and it's very, very intuitive from a user perspective.
Well, thank you, Bronson. I think it was great. I think that was just a little flavor of what you guys can accomplish. Obviously, there's a lot more that Veeam has to offer, but that was a great quick overview of just, the quick and dirty of how backup and recovery works. So thank you so much for doing that.
Yes, sir.
Well, with that, we do encourage you guys, if you have any questions or concerns, if you want a longer demo, if you want a trial instance to try out being back in recovery, we would love to meet with you on an individual basis and actually go over that. We can set up a control environment, a demo unit, let you test it out, kick the tires, make sure it works for you. I will say that of all the customers we've ever demoed with, that something like a 95% of people out buy Veeam. It's just a great product. They are the global leader in backup and recovery solutions because their product just works. It works well, and they have great pricing for us to work with. And we appreciate you jumping on with us. I'm just going to kick us through. Everyone, just make sure everyone if they have anything last things to say, they can jump in. JD, did you want to jump in and say anything before we got everyone loose?
No, I think, our biggest thing is just for your info, Veeam does traditional backup and replication. We protect Microsoft 365. We help automate disaster recovery. And then finally, our most recent releases have been to help you with your Kubernetes environment and Salesforce environments. So it's kind of a full suite of products. And yeah, to Kyle's point, if you want more information on them, we look forward to chatting. Thanks for letting us be here, by the way.
Yeah, thank you guys.
Thank you guys.